Order. Colleagues, welcome back to our place of work.
Parliament is sitting again, against the will of the government. Good afternoon from Westminster with a specially extended lunchtime news on yet another extraordinary day in British politics. In the last half hour, MPs have begun sitting again in the House of Commons after the Supreme Court ruled that Boris Johnson's attempt to suspend Parliament was unlawful. The Speaker said that the prorogation would be expunged from the record and instead it would be recorded that the House had been adjourned. Simon Brown has this.
Parliament returns. It sounds like an action film we've seen before, but although the Brexit deadlock is a never-ending story, today's events are again unprecedented. The ruling of the Supreme Court has returned the power back to Parliament.
Order! Order! Colleagues, welcome back to our place of work.
Urgent question, Joanna Cherry.
To ask the Attorney-General if he will make a statement about his legal opinion on the advice given to Her Majesty the Queen to prorogue Parliament.
I took a close interest in the case. And I oversaw the government's team of counsel. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that if every time I lost a case, I was called upon to resign, I probably would never have had a practice. And the government accepts. The government accepts the judgment and accepts that it lost the case. And at all times, the government acted in good faith and in the belief that its approach was both lawful and constitutional.
This government stands in shame, tendering illegal advice to our monarch and not even able to uphold that most basic but most important of principles, abiding by the rule of law. And what we know from yesterday's leaked document is the Attorney-General said his advice on the question of the law was that this was lawful and within the Constitution, and that any accusation of unlawfulness, he said, were motivated by political considerations. If that is in any way accurate as to his full advice, he was wrong on both counts.
Next move for the government. Jacob Rees-Mogg, the leader of the House of Commons, is expected to lay out the government's order of business, and Parliament may even consider another prorogation.
We need a Queen's speech. We need the government's policy. We need the opposition the opportunity to amend that, to vote against it. We need to reset the parliamentary calendar. We need private members' bills day. We need opposition days. We need backbench business day. Can't do that without a Queen's speech. So, if I had to put 10p on it, guess a short prorogation next week, followed by a Queen's speech the week after.
So what will happen next? Well, the Prime Minister, who was found to have acted unlawfully, has said he won't resign. We know he wants an election, but the opposition will not give him one without the Prime Minister agreeing to an extension over Brexit negotiations. So right now, we are as we were. Only now, the PM has even less options.
Simon Brown reporting. Now our political correspondent Paul McNamara joins me now. Paul, what's going on right now?
Well, right now, we're only half an hour in. The schedule's already changed a little bit to what we first expected. 2 urgent questions have been allowed. The first one, rather unsurprisingly, to Geoffrey Cox, the Attorney-General, about that advice he gave to the government. He said that he will now consider the public interest of further disclosure of his advice. It's been a while since we've had a look inside the chamber. Why don't we take a live look now?
So I think it's a question of wording and of being careful with one's language. But I took that remark, insofar as I saw it reported, simply to be a robust criticism of the judgment and nothing more, which is entitled.
Sir Oliver Letwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have absolute respect for the integrity and the competence of the Attorney General. In the light of what he has told the House this morning, can he guarantee absolutely that, save potentially a few days before a Queen's speech, there can be no question of his permitting Her Majesty's government to have a prorogation between now and the time of 31st October of this year?
What I can undertake to my right honourable friend is that there will be no prorogation that doesn't comply with the terms of the judgment of the Supreme Court.
So not ruling out another prorogation
Speaker,
there.
the Attorney General
But
said
that it
he
will
was going
comply
to
this time round.
Will comply, but not ruling it out. The next question, next urgent question, this is going to be another difficult one for the Prime Minister. This is to Nicky Morgan, the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. And this is about how her department manages possible conflict of interest. And this is in relation to stories at the weekend about payments that were made to a company called Hacker House and about possible impropriety, about the conflicts of interest with a relationship between the Prime Minister and an American businesswoman who runs that company. So another difficult question. Then after that it gets to more ordinary business of the day, and then later on we're going to hear from the Prime Minister, and that will be an interesting one to watch.
Paul McNamara, for the moment, thanks. In the House of Commons right now, we're joined by the Labour MP, Tonia Antoniazzi, and the Conservative MP, Peter Bone. Tonia Antoniazzi, what do you make of events so far? Clearly no promise not to prorogue again, but they'll try and do it legally. What do you make of that?
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. I mean, I suspect that they will try to prorogue again, and I think that's absolutely disgusting, whether it's in line, the last one wasn't in line with the law, as has been proven by 11 Supreme Court judges.
And Peter Bone, I mean, where are you? You're a great constitutionalist. Are you ashamed of your party and the way it's behaved over this last few days?
No, not at all. I'm happy Parliament's sitting. I'm always happy we are sitting in September. I was one of those people that campaigned for sitting in September when the Labour government didn't want to do it. It was only David Cameron that introduced proper sittings in September, so I'm happy to be here. The government did what he thought was right, they thought was right, which the legal opinion people thought was right, and the Supreme Court has come up with a decision that surprised everyone.
And you respect that decision and reckon that is now the law of the land?
Absolutely, and that's why we're sitting today. If the Supreme Court rules on something, that is the law of the land, unless, of course, Parliament legislates to change that law.
Tonia Antoniazzi, I mean, the fact is we've got little more than a month until October the 31st. Are we heading for a brick wall?
A brick wall, I don't know. The most important thing is that members of Parliament are actually in Parliament scrutinising the Prime Minister. We haven't had that opportunity. Now we're back today. We have to really hold him to account for everything that has happened. We have to have transparency. We have to show the public that members of Parliament are there elected to represent their views, and we need to ensure that there is no fear of a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October.
But those ministers who have taken to the airwaves so far seem to have been extremely reluctant to be remotely enthusiastic about what the Supreme Court has done, and have ducked and weaved to try and avoid having to give it their blessing.
Well, I think they have to give it their blessing. This is not about Brexit. The government did say that the prorogation wasn't about Brexit. So let's get back to hold the Prime Minister to account and get through let's get to the 31st of October. I want the Prime Minister to come back with a deal, and I want to be in Parliament scrutinising that deal.
Peter Bone, you're a seasoned politician. Did you ever think you would live to see this sort of behaviour inside the House of Commons?
No, it's quite extraordinary. I mean, the one thing I do agree with, I do hope we get a deal. Boris will get a good deal with the European Union, and we come out with a deal on the 31st of October. We can definitely agree on that, and it's right that the opposition can scrutinise the government. But the fact now, Parliament has broken down because the laws that we work to, our standing orders, are being overturned time and time again by the Speaker, who is completely out of control. And I think what would be better now is one thing we could do. There's nothing for us to do at the moment other than urgent questions. Well, why not have a vote on whether Parliament wants to keep this Speaker. Perhaps we should have a new Speaker straight away.
Well, Peter Bone and Tonia Antoniazzi, thank you both very warmly indeed. Now, the former Deputy Prime Minister, Lord Heseltine, is with us, and there are a few politicians alive with the perspective that you have. Just put this in perspective in terms of how serious is this? How bad is it? I mean, is it the worst thing you've seen happen in however many years you've been in Parliament?
I can't think of a circumstance in which you've had three coincidental crises. First, a government with no majority. Secondly, the appalling prospect of Brexit. And thirdly, a government that has been found guilty of breaking the law. I cannot think of a combination of anything like that severity.
If you were giving them advice, and I know they certainly will not be turning to you for advice, but if you were giving them advice, what would you tell them to do? I mean, nobody has apologized for this. Nobody has sort of stood up and said, this was a terrible thing. We made a very big mistake. We had bad legal advice. They're basically brushing it off and saying, well, a lot of other courts found in our favor, so, we'll tolerate the Supreme Court.
Well, it's almost inconceivable for me to watch a Conservative government behave in this way. The supremacy of the law, above all else, is a tenet of Conservative faith. And no ifs, no buts, no wriggle room. They've lost out in a unanimous decision of 11 justices on a massive constitutional issue. And in any normal circumstances, the Prime Minister would have to go. If the Conservatives were in opposition today, and this was a Labour government, the baying of blood for blood would be of catastrophic scale.
But I can hear the voices of Brexiteers saying to me, this was a dirty job in which those opponents of Brexit were trying to twist events to prevent Brexit happening.
Yes, but they will, because they will do anything to get Brexit through. They started by lying in their teeth to win the referendum campaign. They've now used the device of proroguing Parliament, but there have been all sorts of other attempts.
But look at it from their point of view.
Oh yes, I understand
see all
that.
these shenanigans going on, and they think, what's happened to our Brexit? It's getting pushed further and further away.
I fully understand that argument, and of course there were those on the other side who believe that the Brexit decision was wrong, and it was achieved in a way that was mendacious. And this actually reflects the first point I made. Parliament reflects the country, and there is no consensus in the country as to what should happen, and it's not therefore surprising there's no consensus over there.
What do you think should happen?
Well, that's the problem, because people like me, who believe passionately that Britain's place is at the heart of Europe, are no more likely to bend than Nigel Farage is going to bend.
The funny thing is that I never hear people like you, as you like to describe yourself, saying this was an advisory referendum, one from which various lessons could be learned, but it wasn't a law that was voted on.
Well, I personally don't like referendum because they get muddled up with all sorts of issues, and this one is undoubtedly muddled up with all the economic circumstances. But my own view is clear. That place is supreme. That's where, in the end, the decisions have to be taken. And I have spent my life seeing Labour governments with mandates to do all sorts of things, using that place to try and stop them, frustrate them, or reverse them. And that is where I am on Brexit. I will do whatever I can to serve, I believe, the national interest.
Can the party that you love, can it recover?
Yes, it can, because in the end, the Conservative Party understands that to win power, you have to represent the centre ground of politics. Now, saying that, it sounds a bit pious and a bit hopeful, but my own view is that the incredible success of the Conservative Party over the centuries in always finding a way to regroup and represent that central voice of one nation conservatism will prevail. But today, you have to have a lot of faith.
Should the Prime Minister resign?
Well, in any normal circumstances, he'd have gone. And certainly if the Conservatives were in opposition, they would be clamouring for whoever was the Labour government's Prime Minister's blood. But I am dismayed to see the sort of wriggle room, the compromise. There were other courts that said other things. And this is not the Conservative Party that I have spent my life working in.
Lord Heseltine, thank you very much for joining us. Well, that's the news for now. We're back from Westminster again tonight with all the developments of the day at 7, including, we hope, Boris Johnson's statement to the House. Don't, for goodness sake, miss it. It's history.